I'm recording my homily for the 6th Sunday in Ordinary Time in 2020, and it's such a beautiful day. We finally have sun. I couldn't resist in recording my homily out in the sun, although it is 30 degrees, but still, beautiful sun. So, my homily this weekend took upon a theme that I've talked about before. I think it's worth repeating, right? As they say, repetition is the mother of all learning. And it's this idea that Jesus Christ is this one who often brings us a message that is the opposite of what we would think. That's not to say that he's contradictory to our human nature or his message is contradictory to our human nature, but it is one that is a supernatural. It doesn't fight necessarily our nature, but it brings it to fulfillment, which means that we have to be willing to elevate our nature to something that is supernatural, right? Okay, he says that in the gospel today. So in the gospel this Sunday, we were looking at the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is like a 3-day sermon. This is more like a retreat, if you will, or a conference, where he's giving the people multiple opportunities to hear the word over the course of a couple days. And so this Sermon on the Mount, he says, I have not come to abolish the law or the prophets. Now, why would somebody think that? Well, his teachings are new, right? I mean, he is talking about how they don't need to follow certain laws of the Old Testament, right? Because there's 600 and some laws. And so they may get the perception that he's abolishing the law and the prophets. And he's saying, no, I'm not. I'm bringing it to fulfillment. In other words, God's plan was in place in order to bring the people to this point, to the new covenant. He's not abolishing, he's fulfilling. I like that. I really do. Okay, so he's bringing it to fulfillment. Now, there are some things about what he brings to fulfillment that seems to be the opposite of what we might expect. So, for example, Jesus is very merciful. In fact, oftentimes, I realize this is not completely fair. We would say in the Old Testament they would emphasize justice, right? Punishing the wrong, rewarding the right, kind of thing. And Jesus comes along and emphasizes mercy, forgiving those who've wronged, right? And he often can be kind of hard on those who are seemingly perfect or better than others, right? If there's arrogance in that and pride in that. And so in this mercy, you'd get the perception that he's making it easier for people. He's making the path a little smoother. He's not as rigorous. And that would be a mistake. That's where we get Jesus the opposite. Jesus one who brings the opposite into the message. He never lowers the bar. In fact, today in the Sermon on the Mount, you see him raise the bar. He makes it harder. He makes it harder to follow God. And it's not because of justice. It is because of mercy. So when Jesus looks into your heart, he looks into my heart, he sees what we're capable of. He sees what our human nature was designed for. And so he wants to lead us up on that path. And he's never going to settle. He's never going to say, oh, Father Peter, yeah, I see you've got these weaknesses in your life. Yeah, I'm just fine with that. He's not going to do that. He's going to say, no, I created you for holiness. I created all of you for holiness. Okay. All right. So his mercy actually raises the bar and makes it harder. And that just doesn't seem to be intuitive. What are some examples of that in the gospel this Sunday? He says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not kill. Of course, right? But I say to you, if you hate your brother, if you hold resentments against your brother, if you haven't forgiven your brother, then you are killing him in your heart. Whew. The first commandment doesn't really apply to a lot of us. In confession, people will say, well, Father, I haven't really killed anybody, right? First commandment doesn't apply, literally speaking, to a lot of people. But when Jesus says, but those of you who harbor hatred, It applies to most of us. Most of us, right? And it's a lot harder. So for Jesus, this oppositeness, if you will, this making it harder is because he's now saying, I'm not just worried about your actions. I'm not worried's the wrong word. I'm not just desiring good actions. I'm desiring a good heart. One that desires goodness. And that's where holiness lies, right? It's not superficiality. It's not just actions, but it's what's inside too. All right. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. Of course, we see the damage of that. We see the destruction. We see the betrayals and the loss of confidence in a husband and wife when there's adultery and all these things, right? There is mercy, but we see the damage that it does. But I say to you, one who harbors lust in his heart for another woman has already committed adultery. This is Jesus looking at the 21st century and saying, look at the darkness of the internet. I mean, it's like you could almost say he wrote this for us, for our pornographic generation, where it's like everywhere in our culture to lust after other people, to objectify them is considered acceptable. He makes it harder. He's not just worried about a husband being faithful to his wife in actions, but in his heart. I do encounter a number of marriages where the couple is older, they've been married a long time, but it's like their hearts have drifted. And maybe in their actions they've been faithful, but they don't really love their spouse anymore because they never dealt with the hurts and the feelings of betrayal and those types of things. Right? I've met a lot of people who think that looking at pornography is an acceptable path and it's not adultery, right? It's not. For Jesus, he's saying, nope, I'm raising the bar. You need to have a heart that's pure. He makes it a lot harder. That's a lot harder, especially in the culture we live in. Especially for our youth, right? Okay, so he's raising the bar. That's the opposite of what you would think. Now, I want to give a couple little examples of this, applying it to some church politics, all right? So this is just my own take on things, all right? The reason I offer some of these things, so when I talk to some of my brother priests, when we have things going on in the church, I say, well, do you talk to your people about it? And a lot of times they say, well, no, not really. In the sense that, do you really tell them what you're thinking? Do you really tell them what you believe? And a lot of times priests won't do that with their people. It's the politics, right? We put out the message that's safe, but we don't really tell our people what we're thinking or what we believe. I've never liked that because I think it's disrespectful to our people. I think it creates an environment where we are two-faced, where we don't say what we're really thinking, right? So I offer a couple of thoughts here just so you know what I'm thinking. And hopefully it's not scandalous or anything like that, but it's just something that might be helpful as when you read the news about some things going on. All right, before I get to that though, so I just finished reading the book on Father Stanley Rother. So, priest from Oklahoma, goes down to Guatemala as a missionary. He's subsequently killed out of hatred towards the faith, so he's a martyr. He's now a blessed in the church, right? That's just a step before canonization. And as I was reading the book, and I'm finishing the book, and I'm thinking to myself, I think I'm going to write a letter to the Archbishop. And the reason I was thinking that is because back then, in the 1960s, the Pope came to the American bishops and he said, I'm asking you to send missionaries, priests, religious, lay people, to send them down to Central America, to South America, to help them because they need some help to get established in certain areas. They don't have enough priests. They don't have enough people who are serving, right? So to get established. And so that was the reason that he went down there. Father Stanley went down there. And I'm thinking to myself, we don't do that. Now, if I propose to the Archbishop that we should send some priests down to Central America or South America, what do you think the response would be? we don't even have enough priests for our own diocese, right? The answer would be no. It's like, no, we can't even serve our own parishes. Why would we send them out to other dioceses? And this is where we get Jesus of the opposites. You see, I think part of the reason that we struggle with vocations is because we've forgotten how to expand our hearts. And I don't just mean priests, I mean our families. A young man is not going to discern the priesthood. A young woman is not going to discern the religious life if the faith is dead in the family, if it's not real for the parents. They're just not going to discern it. It's not real. It's why would I give 100% of my life to something where it doesn't seem like that's what's expected? I would rather do something else, right? And so God's will doesn't enter into their framework of their discernment, of their vocation. And so to make it real means we need to expand our hearts. We need to be able to not just think of ourselves and say, maybe this is exactly the right moment where we have to trust God. We put our faith in God, and we send out, and we don't just send out, we don't necessarily like this priest, so we'll send them somewhere else. That kind of a thing. But we send some of our best priests on mission because we want to bless those other dioceses. We want to help them. And we'll make even more of a sacrifice for the sake of them. And what that does is it's the opposite of what you would think, but it creates a greater atmosphere of love, and I think would actually increase vocations. Because it's real. That love is real. It's not convenient. So, just been thinking about that, right? Okay, now, in the context of that, this last week, Pope Francis released his document, his conclusions on the Amazon Synod. Now, a number of people in my parish didn't really know anything about it. I never talked about it. I probably should have, but I didn't. So this last weekend I explained it a little bit. So the Amazon Synod was a gathering of bishops and other people to address some of the problems in the Amazon regions, which is mostly in Brazil, but some of the other countries as well, down in South America. So some of the issues they were addressing was like environmental issues, okay? But the other was the fact that there's not enough priests and religious down there to be able to serve the people. And in the case of priests, there's not enough priests to bring the Eucharist. In fact, they were saying that there's some places in the Amazon where the Catholics get Mass about once every couple years. Once every 3 years, they'll have a Mass. And we think we have a priest shortage, right? Last night I was just doing a little research on this, and so Pope Francis created these 2 new dioceses down there in order to better address the concerns of the rural area. So he wanted to create dioceses that would focus on the rural areas rather than just on the cities. And one diocese that he created, do you want to know how many diocesan priests are in that diocese? 1. There's about 9 religious priests from religious orders. There's 1 diocesan priest. And the diocese is small. It's about 100,000 Catholics, right? That's small. But 1 priest, 1 diocesan priest. So here we think about we have a priest shortage. We don't. Here at St. Mary's, right here, we have Mass every single day except Mondays. In fact, many of those days we have multiple Masses. At our mission, we have it once a week, but we have it once a week, not once every 3 years. So in context, we don't really have a priest shortage, do we? Right? So Pope Francis has this Amazon Synod. Now, what he does, this is the politics part. What it seemed like to me, and I might be very wrong on this, but what it seemed like to me was that he handpicked bishops to lead this synod who already have a particular view on what the solution is. Because many of the bishops who were sent to the synod and appointed by the Pope were bishops who believe that we should ordain women as deacons, okay? So that would theoretically increase the number of deacons we have. And we should allow married men to be ordained priests. Okay? Right now, that's not the standard path that we have. It's celibate men who are not married, right? Okay. So, many of the bishops that he handpicks to go down for this synod believe that that will help increase the number of vocations. So, in other words, their plan is to propose to the Pope that we need to change the Church's teachings on those two areas of ordination. Now, so that's what a lot of the scuttlebutt was about, and a lot of discussion in the press. So you'd think that that's what he's aiming for when he's the one who picked those bishops to go down there. Now, they go down there, they have their synod, they release their document to send to the Pope of what they think the solutions are, which includes possibly ordaining women as deacons, ordaining married men as priests, etc., etc. The Pope gets it, he releases his response, and everybody's thinking he's going to go along with it because he set it up. He set everything, he set the groundwork for that to happen. And he didn't approve any of that. He didn't approve it. And so the people who went down are like, what? Well, why did we do it, right? It's almost like, your kid is getting ready to graduate from high school and you say, okay, if you graduate from high school, I will buy you a new car. So your kid graduates from high school and you say, just kidding, I'm not going to get you a car. I mean, that's kind of what it is. All right, so my thought on this. One, I don't really understand. I really don't understand why the Pope didn't approve it. I don't understand because I just don't know his thinking there. But when you read his document, he says, what we need is holiness, right? What we need is holiness. What we need is people willing to give of themselves 100%, right? But he also says what we need is for other bishops around the world to look at their own diocese and to send missionaries, and if they do send missionaries, to please send them to the Amazon region. So he's asking for generosity of the bishops to send missionaries, if possible, to the Amazon region. All right. I've been thinking a lot about that. It's like the Pope in the 1960s who did the same thing. He says, look, be generous with your priests. Now, the Pope also gets a little irritated because some of the richer dioceses, like the American diocese, because of our shortage of priests, and we don't want to give up our parishes, we don't want to give up our masses, we like Mass being at convenient times, etc., etc. What we do is we go to the poorer dioceses, and we convince them to send their priests here, while they actually suffer more because of it. Now, the reason that they often come here is because they can get financial compensation, which then funds a lot of their activities in their country, like their seminaries and stuff. But at the same time, it's not us thinking about them, really. It's us thinking about us. And so the Pope wants to challenge us on that. He says, maybe we should send missionaries down to them. I like this. I like this thinking because it is one of opposites. Maybe the Pope just recognizes that the solution is not the easy solution here. It's not just to change the laws or change the rules, but to say we need to expand our hearts out. We need to raise the bar, right? Now, if you ever want an imagery of Jesus raising the bar, just think of the crossbar on the cross, right? I didn't even notice it, but I got this tree right behind me. So just think of a crossbar on this tree, right? And so you have the cross then. And that crossbar is what Jesus is nailed to. But the thing is, he's under it, right? And so he's not going to lower it for anybody. That's not mercy. What he does, though, is he gets down and he helps us up. Even to the point of him dying for us, he will help us to become the people that he knows we're capable of. We have to be willing to expand our hearts out to that, right? All right. God bless you all. Next week, we start Lent. Great. So I want you to be thinking about Lent. What I was telling my people this week, and I put in my bulletin article next week, just giving some ideas. But what I tell them is, I want you to come up with 10 things that you want to do for Lent, not 1 or 2, right? 10. Because then through the course of Lent, as you pray and as you discern, you're going to find that probably like 5 of them are not from God, right? It's not what God wanted you to do during Lent. So you just scrap them at some point during Lent. But you'll probably be left with 3, 4, 5 things that God really does want you to do. But shoot high, right? Come up with 10, and then begin praying about it, and we'll get ready for Lent, all right? Okay, God bless. Bye.